Welcome. As always, I'll give a few seconds for people to hop on here. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm not in the hospice office. I'm in my place, so and I thought the window was a better background than my kitchen because hey, it's my kitchen. One of the things I would like to encourage you to do is share this presentation. A presentation, that sounds like I'm trying to sell you something. Whatever we call our time together, our grief group, our few moments here, the advantage of doing this on Facebook is that you can share it. It sends a link. People don't have to download videos, or you can go back. You can watch it as often as you want, or as often as you need to, because sometimes I throw a lot of stuff in and it's hard to, I don't expect people to sit there and take notes. But I guess we'll go ahead and get going. So welcome. I was watching a movie the other day with my wife. We love sports movies, especially anything that's based on a true story. So, we have a lot of those and we watch a lot of them. And we were watching a movie called We Are Marshall. And I don't know if you've seen the movie or not. It's based on a true story. Marshall University is their football program. There had been a plane crash where they lost their football team. Everybody perished. And this was a story about the following year. The challenges of a new coach coming in, what players they could get their hands on, because obviously they lost, the team. So they had to do a lot of recruiting. One of the issues that it really just struck me is the father of one of the star players who had passed away in the plane crash. He was on the board of the university, and he was really struggling with the new coach and everything that's going. I can't imagine that kind of pain. But as he was starting to get to the point where he could manage his grief a little bit, he said something that really just stuck me. Very poignant. And he looked at the fiance of his deceased son, and he said, "Grief is messy." Wow, if there's ever anything that is true, that is grief is definitely messy. It does not come in 5 easy, neat, clean stages like everybody's taught. Does everybody go through those stages? Yeah, pretty much. Not in any order, not with any real distinct parameters. You will go through, an anger part, a bargaining part, denial. You will get to acceptance. But it's messy, and that's okay. So if you feel like it's that grief is messy, that's kind of the way it was supposed to be. And I've said this, you've heard me say this before, this grief is a process. This is something that God put in us to help us heal. But it made me think, when he said grief is messy, I bet you we could put a lot of labels on. Grief is blank. What would you put in? What would you put in there to fill the blank? And I just come up with a couple things. I can tell you that grief is not, pardon me, grief is not something you can prepare for. Even if you've had a loved one who was ill for a long time, you think you can be prepared. Certain parts of it, which they will refer to as anticipatory grief, you'll get some of those parts out of the way. But no matter what, if you love someone, it's going to hit you in a way that you did not expect. That's universal. It's not, grief is not something that you can prepare for. Things and triggers come right out of the blue. And you will, and I'll just speak, to someone who's had a long-term illness. There can even be a sense of relief that this person's no longer suffering. And that's true, and that's good. Then you feel guilty for having that sense of relief and being able to take a little time for yourself. That's part of the messy part. You're not doing anything wrong by looking out for you, but that grief just comes out in an ugly way, out of nowhere, and smacks you upside the head, and you can't prepare for it. So, when you wake up, you don't necessarily get to have the choice that, okay, I'm better today. I'm not going to have to deal with it because some smell, sound, memory, whatever will come up, or an old habit maybe that you had, and it'll trigger stuff. But that's all right. It'll trigger stuff when you're able to handle it. Your mind has a way of protecting you from things. We see this a lot with repressed memories of especially something traumatic. The mind will protect that person, and it'll manifest when they're ready to deal with it. So you will have those messy triggers, and it'll come out of nowhere. But you know what? It's there because you're able to deal with it. So take some hope in that. Grief is, to throw another thing on here, grief is patient. It doesn't just show up. It doesn't just go away. You never, ever stop grieving. You manage it in different ways, but this is a lifelong journey. That doesn't mean that you're going to be miserable. No, it actually, if you go through the process, allow grief to do its work, you're going to move into a healthy area of life. And there's nothing wrong with that, because you deserve a life. And it's not dishonoring to your loved one that you're grieving in a different way, that you start to look back at some of the memories. And this is my own personal experience. At first it was extreme sadness. As years go by, you look back at certain memories on things that you can laugh about. Oh, you miss them. You'll laugh and it'll mix with tears, but it'll actually, part of that grief process will actually bring joy. There is, as far as grief being patient, there is always time to step back and say goodbye. As often as you need to do that. We think, well, we have the funeral and memorial, and people will tell you, well, there's no right or wrong way, which there isn't. It's what works for you and what helps you get through. What if you were so stricken during the funeral that you weren't able to deal with what you wanted to deal with? You were dealing with pain, not able to remember your loved one as well. Well, do a memorial. Just because you had a funeral doesn't mean you can't do a memorial down the road. That's just a little tip. Grief is patient, and it stays with us in some forms for the rest of our lives. And when we're able to process things, we get into a place where we're able to move through. I'm going to read you something here in a moment that I actually, that happened to me. This is my personal experience. I'll probably get all blubbery while reading it, so you just be patient with me. But this is an experience that I had of a loss from a long time ago, and how the memories and the grief helped move me into a very positive place. So I have my computer on here. Let me pull this up and read this. I was driving through Algonac today, And I wrote this a few years back, but I was driving through Algonac today and I did something I hadn't planned. I stopped at a small store that my older sister Dawn had told me about. She told me about a time when I was just a toddler and there was no food in the house. There was no food because my mother and father liked to drink and party, which didn't leave money for food. He wasn't the type that usually held down a job either. And she didn't work. She had her own partying to think about. Now, these aren't the parents who eventually adopted me, met my needs, and raised me. These were my first parents. Anyways, Dawn, being the oldest, yet still a kid her own self, too often had to be the responsible one in the family. If she didn't do something, baby brother was not going to eat on that day. So she went into the store and stole a box of cornflakes so that I wouldn't go hungry. She confessed years later about the guilt she felt stealing, but didn't know what else to do. I thanked her for her looking out for me all those years ago, which of course made her cry. So today I went into that store and the owner asked me how I could help me. When I went up to the counter, I said, "I'm here to give you some money." He looked at me slightly puzzled and I said, "I have a debt to pay." Then I told him what had happened all those many years back, and I continued, "My sister has since passed away, and I would like to take care of her debt." He extended his hand and he said, "You are a real man. Thank you, and I'm so sorry about your sister." He went on to say that most everyone that has a debt here, because I've tried to help them in some way by giving them credit, never return and pay their debt. They never pay their bill. They just move on. He thanked me again and shook my hand again. He said, "You didn't have to do this. No one would have ever known." Just then, the other customers came in and were behind me, and I said, "I have to do this because Jesus Christ paid a debt for me that he didn't owe, and it was a debt that I could have never paid." He responded, "You are absolutely right, and thank you again." The way that I see it, this young girl stealing to provide 50-some years ago had a greater impact than she could have ever known. The act was a seed that was planted, which took many years to grow, but it grew into a chance to share Christ with strangers in a store with an act he will never forget. And you know what? To this day, I love cornflakes. Cornflakes may not be the best tasting cereal, but if you look in my cupboard, there's one cereal that I eat, cornflakes. I'll tell you what, they are the sweetest thing ever. He is faithful. So let me end with this thought. We talked about things that grief is. Grief is messy. We know that. Grief isn't something you could prepare for. Grief is patient. There's always time to step back and say goodbye, even 50-some years later. Grief is, and here's the thought I want to leave you with, grief is love persevering. That's a good thing. So I hope that helped a little bit. If you have questions, you can always email me. And again, I'll give you my personal email address just because it's easy to remember, bobthechurchbuilder@gmail.com. So email me. Love to talk to you. You can call the hospice home anytime. There's always someone who'd be glad to talk to, be glad to help. Or if you have ideas for this, I would love to hear them. So in the meantime, my wish for you today, as always, is peace.